What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Which pitcher had more pressure on them when joining the Dbacks? Was it Corbin Burnes or was it Zack Greinke? And is Corbin Burnes too low in Fanduel's 2025 odds for the Cy Young Award?
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? The always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist, and I'm a graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. On today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, we were discussing which Dbacks franchise pitcher had more pressure on them when joining Arizona. Was it Corbin Burnes or was it Zack Greinke? Looking at FanDuel's odds for the Cy Young next season and seeing where Corbin Burnes land because maybe he's too low. And then seeing which teams are good trade partners, part one, because I got a part two that I'm going to be discussing on Friday's podcast where we got some more trade partners out there. So a whole bunch I want to talk to you guys about on today's podcast. Thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. You did it all 2024. Continue to do it in 2025. Thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen of the day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms. So please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. But now let's get into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast and let's discuss which pitcher had more pressure on them when joining the Arizona Diamondbacks. Was it Zack Greinke or was it Corbin Burnes? Because both of these players have a good case for saying they have more pressure on them. Both players at the time of their deals, franchise record-breaking money by Arizona. So whenever you become the newest, highest paid player for a franchise, that's immediately a lot of pressure, no matter what kind of situation you're walking into. So considering Greinke got like 206, Corbin Burnes got like 210, which pitcher has more pressure on them entering the Arizona Diamondbacks? Because you can make the case for either, and we're going to make the case for both because I definitely have an opinion on who has more pressure on them for next year or, all time, I guess. Because you look at Zack Greinke, and at the time, of course, his was also franchise record deal. And you look at the type of season he was coming off, I think that's important context when you think about the players, Greinke, Corbin Burnes. What kind of seasons were they enduring before coming to Arizona? Were they coming off disappointing years where the D-backs are kind of giving them like a one-year prove-it deal? No. We know Corbin Burnes was fantastic last year, and Zack Greinke, the year prior to joining the D-backs, had according to Baseball Reference, led the National League in WAR at 8.9, led the NL in ERA at 1.66, led the NL in ERA plus, led the NL in WHIP, finished second in Cy Young voting, seventh in MVP voting. Like, he was coming off a fantastic season, and he was doing that all with the first place LA Dodgers. He was leaving a situation where he was going to the playoffs, getting, accolation from the Baseball Writers Association, getting the accolades he would want, getting the acclaim he would want. He's on a team that's winning games. It's like the situation was great for Greinke. It was in a rotation with Clayton Kershaw. Like, that 1-2 combination was nasty. And so it's like, if you're Zack Greinke, do you want to leave that situation and come to the little brother Arizona Diamondbacks who hadn't made the postseason in the 4 prior years? Yeah, that's exactly what he wanted to do. He left the first place Dodgers, who were 90 plus wins, who went to the postseason, just finished second Cy Young voting, and said, let me join the D-backs, who hadn't made it to the playoffs the 4 prior seasons. And the D-backs, when they signed Zack Greinke, their situation at the time was bad. Their roster was bad, but for some reason, the D-backs thought it was time to get aggressive. So they dropped the bag on Zack Greinke. And then the very next day, they did something insane, and they traded the number one pick, Dansby Swanson, for Shelby Miller, which we all know ended up just being a horrendous deal by the D-backs. But when you think about what the D-backs were doing that offseason, they thought it was smart to spend a bag on Zack Greinke. They thought it was smart to go all in on Shelby Miller. And so when you're Zack Greinke and you think about the pressure that he has coming into the situation, he just got the biggest bag in franchise history. He's leaving an already made team in the LA Dodgers who was good to come to this new startup in Arizona, who is expecting him to be the savior of the franchise from day one. Going into a franchise and a team who has been mediocre for years and then expected to be good just because they signed you, like that is a lot of pressure if you're Zack Greinke. So he definitely has the case to say he has more pressure than Corbin Burnes, because entering a situation with a team who hadn't made the playoffs in years, leaving a team that was one of the best in the National League already, and now you have to go lift up this mediocre franchise, that's a lot on Zack Greinke. Well, how about Corbin Burnes? What's his case? Because Burnes not expected to be the savior like a Zack Greinke, right? But he is expected to be the missing piece to put the D-backs over the top. Arizona tasted the World Series just 2 years ago, missed the playoffs last year, mostly due to pitching. So this is a team that is desperate to win right now. They believe their championship World Series window is right now, and Burnes is expected to be the guy that could hopefully put the D-backs over the top. And it's not just he's expected to put the D-backs over the top. The other reason why we signed Corbin Burnes is not just because of his value in the regular season, because we know that's tremendously high. We know he's a Cy Young candidate, and he's going to boost this rotation a ton. But the other reason the D-backs signed Corbin Burnes is because of rotation insurance. Fan favorites like Zach Gallen and Merrill Kelly will probably leave the D-backs next year. And so when you're thinking about the pressure that Corbin Burnes has on him coming to Arizona, he has the pressure of delivering for a team with expectations, and he is potentially going to have to replace some fan favorites, the heartbeats of this rotation next year. Not to mention, the top of the NL is tougher than ever. When you look at that Dodgers lineup and the Braves and the Phillies, and you see the Padres, like the NL is loading up. So I definitely agree. There was a lot of pressure on Zack Greinke when he was coming over to Arizona, because he had these unrealistic expectations to lift up a mediocre franchise to new heights. But I think there's more pressure on Corbin Burnes, because I think being signed by a serious contender and being the guy that's expected to put this team over the top, this is a team with World Series expectations, with a rotation that surely disappointed last year, maybe the weakest point of this team last season. And now you're giving new franchise record-breaking money to Corbin Burnes. If he flames out with Arizona, or if Arizona does not make it back to the postseason, it's a way bigger disappointment than the D-backs not making it to the playoffs the first year with Zack Greinke. So because of that, I believe there's way more pressure on Corbin Burnes right now than there was when Zack Greinke first signed with the Arizona Diamondbacks. Now we'll discuss where Corbin Burnes lands in the latest Fanduel Cy Young odds, and if he's too low, we'll discuss that in segment number 2. Did Rocket Money help you find any subscriptions you forgot about or that you were paying for twice? That definitely happened to me. I had a few subscriptions that I didn't even realize I was still paying for, and Rocket Money made it easy to track them all down. It's like having a personal assistant for your finances. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps you find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and it helps to lower your bills so you can grow your savings. It brings everything together all in one place, whether it's subscriptions or your spending habits or even the goals you want to hit this year. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/lockedon today. That's rocketmoney.com/lockedon, rocketmoney.com/lockedon. All right. Back here on the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast. And now let's discuss if Corbin Burnes is too low in the latest Fanduel odds for Cy Young in 2025, because we know Burnes is a guy with already one Cy Young on his resume already back in 2021, where he was absolutely dominant for the Brewers, and he did it without even starting like a full season worth of games. Like, he was so good in 2021. He only had to make 28 starts because he led the league. ERA 2.43, strikeouts per 9, 12.6, home runs per 9.4, and FIP at 163. And since then, hasn't been as elite as that Cy Young season, but hasn't finished lower than 8th and finished as high as 5th last year with the Baltimore Orioles. And now he's coming back to the National League, where I actually think it's tougher right now to win the Cy Young in the NL as opposed to winning the Cy Young in the AL, because the AL Cy Young Award feels like it's Skubal, Garrett Cole, and then whoever you want to throw in from like the Mariners or maybe like a Framber Valdez. Like, it is definitely not as strong in the American League. Like, you look at last year's voting and it's Skubal, who had a fantastic season, but still, I don't know if he has like that national recognition yet. Then it was Seth Lugo from the Royals, who was a reliever, who was literally a reliever for the Padres, first year starter, finished his second Cy Young voting. Third was a closer. Fourth was another Kansas City Royal. Like, you had 2 Royals in the top 5 with Class A and Skubal. Like, it's going to be tougher to win the Cy Young in the National League for sure. And when you look at the odds right now, they currently have Corbin Burnes ranked number 5 in Cy Young odds. I want to throw it out to you guys if you guys think it's too low, because we're going to go through the top. You guys tell me if you guys think it's accurate that Corbin Burnes is number 5, because in my opinion, I think he's slightly too low. I'm okay with number 1. Number 1 is Paul Skeens at plus 300. And to be honest, I'm at the point where maybe Paul Skeens should be like minus 150, because coming off the season he just had, where he made 23 starts and just looked like the most dominant pitcher in Major League Baseball. Like, if he does that, if he does anywhere near that, if he gives you 90% of his rookie season, which is insane. If someone can just replicate their rookie season, they would win the Cy Young. Like, that's true for Paul Skeens. If he replicates his rookie season over the course of a full year, Paul Skeens will win the Cy Young in 2025. So I'm fine with him being the favorite. He's massive 6'6". He's only 23 years old. He's got a nasty pitching arsenal. Like, Paul Skeens is deserved of the favorite for the Cy Young Award. Number 2 in the odds is Zack Wheeler at plus 750. And as we've discussed a lot with Corbin Burnes, when comparing his stats the last few years to other guys around Major League Baseball, it's basically like him, Wheeler, and like Fried is like the only comparable guys. Wheeler and Burnes basically have like the same ERA the last 4 seasons. Burnes probably has like slightly more innings pitched, but not much. Their strikeouts per 9 is around the same. Their whip is around the same. Like, they pretty much are identical the last 4 years. And so if you're talking about who has higher Cy Young odds, like in terms of the player profile, it should probably be even. But if I'm being honest, I'm fine with Wheeler being ahead of Burnes in the Cy Young odds. Feels like Wheeler is just due. Feels like he's flirted with the Cy Young for a few seasons now. Finished second in Cy Young voting to Corbin Burnes in 2021. Finished second this past year in 2024. If he has another good season similar to 21 or 24, they might just give it to him. If he has a season similar to what he did last year and there's no one considerably better than him, like if everyone's kind of on the same playing field, they might give it to Wheeler because he's been flirting with it for the last few years. It might just be time to give him one. So I'm fine with Paul Skeens at plus 300, number 1. Zack Wheeler plus 750, number 2. I think that's fine to have those 2 guys ahead of Corbin Burnes as favorites for the Cy Young. But the next 2 is where I have a little bit more contention. Not huge, but a little bit. And it's kind of crazy to say, but the guy who just won the Cy Young Award, I do think he should potentially be behind Corbin Burnes. Now, Chris Sale at age 35 had a season I can't explain. He led the NL with 18 wins, led the NL in ERA at 2.38, led the NL strikeouts at 2.25, led the NL at strikeouts per 9, FIP, ERA plus. I'm not surprised Chris Sale was able to do it because Chris Sale is a super talented pitcher. I'm surprised he was able to do it in his age 35 season after never having a Cy Young Award, after looking like from a health perspective, being absolutely cooked since essentially he won the World Series in 2018. He wasn't good in 2019. Then the next few seasons, he was riddled with injuries, wasn't that good in 2023. Then comes back this season. It's expected entering the year to maybe just be like the number 5 starter for Chris Sale. Like the way we talked about Chris Sale entering 2024 is like how we talk about Travis Kelce. Like, just keep him on ice until the playoffs. He'll heat up the last few weeks of the regular season, and then you'll unleash him for the playoffs. That's what it felt like with Chris Sale. Just get him healthy to the playoffs and then unleash him there. Instead, the Braves put a massive workload on Chris Sale, and he ended up winning the Cy Young Award. But do I believe he can do it again? I'm not too sure about that. At plus 800, I would rather take Corbin Burnes at plus 1,200 because I know Corbin Burnes' health is just a way better bet than Chris Sale. Can Chris Sale give me back-to-back Cy Young level seasons with perfect health? I just don't know if that's in the cards after seeing how the previous few seasons went. I'm happy that he was healthy this year. I'm happy he finally got some hardware that he deserved. I just don't know if I believe it's replicable knowing the history of Chris Sale's health. I look at Corbin Burnes, 2021 was the last time he finished. Corbin Burnes' Cy Young season 2021 was the last time he finished under 193 innings pitched. So I'm just going to bet on Corbin Burnes finishing higher than Chris Sale and Cy Young voting because I believe in Corbin Burnes' health a lot more than I believe in Chris Sale's health. Same with the guy who's number 4 in Cy Young voting. Odds, Blake Snell at plus 1,000. It's almost the same case as Chris Sale, maybe not as egregious, but Blake Snell's another one of those guys who just doesn't pitch enough innings. Despite having 2 Cy Young awards on his belt, the thing is, this is the Blake Snell argument in a nutshell. If he makes 180 innings pitch, he will probably win the Cy Young because he's made at least 180 innings pitch twice in his career. In 2018, he had 180.2 innings pitch. In 2023, he had 180 innings pitch exactly. Those are his 2 career highs. 180.2 and 180 flat are his 2 career highs in innings pitch. In both of those seasons, he won the Cy Young Award. Every other year in his 9-year career, he never had more than 129 innings pitched. So the question is Blake Snell going to hit at least 180 innings? Because if he does that, he's probably going to win the Cy Young. Anything less than that, he's probably going to only make 20 starts. Like, that is Blake Snell in a nutshell. Either he makes 20 starts or he makes 32 starts and win the Cy Young Award. And if I have to bet on Blake Snell's health, considering he's only made at least 129 starts once since 2018, I'm going to bet once again on Corbin Burnes' health over Blake Snell's. And so if you're looking at Cy Young votes, or if you're looking at Cy Young odds right now for next season, go put some money, go lay a couple shekels down on Corbin Burnes because at plus 1,200, I think he's a way better bet than Blake Snell. I think he's a way better bet than Chris Sale, especially when you take into account health. The talent of Sale and Snell, it's tough to say back to back, is definitely good enough to win the Cy Young, but are you going to get enough innings pitch? I don't know. Corbin Burnes has been at least 193 innings pitched for the last 3 seasons, and I would like to bet on his health over some of those other guys ahead of him in the Cy Young voting odds. So, yes, Corbin Burnes is way too low in Fanduel Cy Young odds for 2025. When we look at his health compared to guys like Chris Sale and Blake Snell, Corbin Burnes should definitely be higher. So I'll take my free money and throw a few shekels down on Corbin Burnes to win the Cy Young at plus 1,200 in 2025. Now we'll discuss some teams who are good trade partners for the D-backs in segment number 3. And if you're looking to buy tickets to an upcoming sport or an event, then the best place to do that, of course, is going to be Game Times, because Game Time is the best place for last minute deals on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and more. They have this feature called All In Pricing. When you toggle this feature on, it shows you your total cost up front with no surprise fees at checkout. You get a panoramic view from your seat before you buy. They also have the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. All right. Let's get back to the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Let's discuss some teams who would make good trade partners for the Dbacks. And it's mostly because they have some players that I think could fit what the Dbacks need this offseason. Because when looking at the rest of the Dbacks needs, their rotation has been addressed. If anything, they need to get rid of some guys from the rotation, right? Whether that's Erod, Monty, if you want to get crazy with a Fott or Ryan Nelson, if you want to get crazier and trade a pending free agent and Zach Gallen or Merrill Kelly, like the D-backs have options in the rotation if they want to trade some guys away. But there's still a couple holes in their team. They still can use a right-handed power bat to go in their little DH slot, and they could definitely use another back-end reliever or two. And so who are some teams that are willing to make a trade, whether it's because right now they look at their franchise, they look at their team, they're looking around and say, maybe it's not our time. Maybe we could just extract some value from some of the players on their roster. Or maybe they think a 1-for-1 swap or something where we have some that can help them, they have some that they can help us. Or maybe they just don't want to pay these players going forward, and they're saying, hey, this guy's going to get expensive soon. We'll rather give him up now, get something back instead of just losing him for nothing in free agency. And so there's a multitude of reasons as to why these teams could potentially want to do business with the Arizona Diamondbacks. And the first team I want to talk about is the Tampa Bay Rays, is a team that a lot of, if you look at D-backs Twitter community, they would love for the D-backs to make a trade with the Tampa Bay Rays because they got a couple players that fans of the D-backs would like. The first one is probably Pete Fairbanks, the closer for the Tampa Bay Rays, who is pretty good, high velocity reliever, good back end guy, coming off a season where he was a little bit up and down for the most part, but you look at his numbers the last few years and he's been nasty. And the biggest thing is he's been a strikeout machine. And in 2024, he just wasn't that. Only 8.7 strikeouts per nine when he was like around 13 the previous 4 seasons. Like, he could be a nice guy to roll the dice on, coming off a little bit of a down season. Maybe he doesn't break the bank for you if you're the D-backs, and you could go out there and potentially trade for Pete. There's also some other dudes on the Rays that I know D-backs fans would be very interested in. You got Yandy Diaz as well out there. We know we just traded for Josh Naylor, but Yandy is someone that could be a free agent at the end of 2026 with a team option, maybe do a little platoon DH first base option with Naylor and Yandy Diaz. Diaz is someone that bats righty, and Naylor, we know, is a lefty batter. Like, I don't know. There could just be something there having 2 first basemen. One's a righty, one's a lefty. One could be a DH, one could be a starter. I think Yandy Diaz is someone that a lot of people would like the D-backs to be in on. And also he plays a little third base too. So maybe do some kind of rotation with him, Naylor, Eugenio. Like it all depends on how Torey Lovullo, we know he loves his cross platoon matchup. So that could be a question for Torey Lovullo. But I think Yandy Diaz is just someone interesting when looking at guys with expiring contracts. Yandy's someone that I would be interested in. Good hitter, got some pop as well. Fairbanks is the other guy, can also be a free agent at the end of 2026. So if you're looking at 2 pending free agents, those are 2 of them. I think another one that would be kind of interesting, the only problem is he's a lefty, but Brandon Lowe, I think, is also another pending free agent, has a ton of power, is a guy who has been a little bit up and down in his career, but the power has always been there. If you wanted a lefty with some pop, who could play a little second base, who could play a little outfield, I think Brandon Lowe would be a very interesting option. Another team that I think would be interesting is the Detroit Tigers, who have One guy who I know D-backs fans would be happy to bring in Spencer Torkelson, ASU product, taken number 1 overall, and had just been a disaster with the Tigers. I mean, that whole organization outside 2024 has been an offensive disaster. Torkelson had a decent season 2023. 31 bombs, 94 ribbies, 758 OPS. The WAR, he still was barely a 1-win player despite all that in 2023. And if that pop is real, at least a power hitting righty DH could be perfect for Spencer, as well as a backup first baseman to Josh Naylor. I just think he could be really interested as a potential resurgent player. Being back home in the state of Arizona, I would love it. Plus, the Tigers have a little guy named Tyler Holton, who has been a hidden gem for them, who came over from Arizona, who I don't know how the D-backs didn't keep the one reliever that they had in the building who ended up being good, but Tyler Holton has been fantastic for them the last 2 years. So not sure if they want to give up a guy like that, but if we were able to bring back Tyler Holton and trade for a hometown hero and Spencer Torkelson, I think that would be very interesting. I think the St. Louis Cardinals are another team that we've discussed a bunch on this podcast who I think would also make a very interesting trade partner because they're a team that does seem to be shopping around some players this offseason. We know Nolan Arenado's on the block. Does he make a ton of sense for the D-backs? Not really with Eugenio Suarez, but if you put Nolan Arenado at third and Suarez is your everyday DH, like that is an interesting option. Arenado, I don't think he's completely cooked. Definitely did not look that good last season, but he still has pop in that bat. He's still a great defender. And I would still like to believe that 2022, when he finished third in MVP voting, was not that long ago. I would like to believe Nolan Arenado could be one of these guys that has a pretty big bounce back at age 34, new environment, new situation. Like sometimes it just happens. You look at that veteran and you're like, oh, that guy has been cooked for like 3 or 4 years, but now all of a sudden he's good again. Like it happens all the time in a high variance sport like baseball, right? Even a guy like Joey Votto, all of a sudden at the end there, he had like one more MVP type season, right? From 2019 he wasn't that good. 2020 Joey Votto was all right. Then all of a sudden 2021 he looked like an MVP again. And really the thing with Joey Votto, it was the power, because those 3 prior seasons he topped out at no more than 15 home runs. And then 2021 he was back to 36 home runs. And sometimes it happens like that where a major leaguer, where they can have 2 or 3 down seasons, then all of a sudden they come roaring back and have an all-star year. And so maybe that could happen with Nolan Arenado with the D-backs. If anything, we all know Ryan Hesley is someone that we would love in Arizona. The only question is, how expensive would he be for a guy who throws as hard as he does, who had led the NL in saves this past year? It's a big question. Now, he is going to be a free agent at the end of 2026, so a pending free agent definitely shouldn't break the bank when you're talking about a trade package, but with how good he is and how much teams like elite relievers, he could still be a little expensive. And then the last team that I think could be interesting because they're an absolute dumpster fire is the LA Angels. And they have a little guy named Luis, and then I always mess up his last name. Rengifo. I believe that's how you pronounce it. I always have to look it up before the podcast, and in my brain, it always gets confused. Luis Rengifo, I think, is a very interesting player. Basically, like a 760 OPS guy the last 3 years, like a 275 average, a 2-win player. He's got like 15 home run pop if you play him like around 100 games. Last year, stole 24 bases in 78 games. Like, I think as a DH super utility infielder, Luis could be a perfect guy for Arizona that doesn't break the bank at all. Pending free agent at the end of 2026. Like, he has breakout potential in a good role on a good team. We're in all over him. Like, he has Randall Grichuk type season written all over him, where kind of not that well known, productive player, but you get him in a situation where he could shine, and that could be the best case scenario for him for his career. So Luis, I think, could be that Grichuk where you put him in Arizona with a lineup that's good, surrounding him by good players, positive environment, get him out of the Angels where it's just a dumpster fire, bad vibes year after year. I think Luis in Arizona could have a monster season as a DH and super utility infielder. So he is someone that I would be very interested in, and that is why I believe the LA Angels are a great trade partner And if they ever want to get out of the Mike Trout business, he is someone that I would still be willing to take a gamble on. Now, that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back on Friday for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight as we'll talk more about the D-backs offseason. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Dowson.